Carl. Carl is a regional manager, vice president, and heavy producer for Chase Manhattan Corporation, Mortgage Corporation. And Carl has, over the last couple of years, his volume ranges between $44 and $81 million, so Carl's a pretty heavy producer. And before we get into the actual interview, our listeners are always interested in where people came from and where they went to school and how they got into business. So why don't we start there?
Sure. I am a native Chicagoan. I've always lived in the collar counties around greater Chicagoland. I graduated from Indiana State University, and yes, I went to school with Larry Bird. And I
but can you play basketball with him?
No, I can't. But I actually started my business career with a Fortune 80 in the world of personnel, and quickly decided that that was not something that I wanted to do, and eventually took a couple of years and sold some real estate. And when I decided that discussing green shag carpet with the ladies was not on my agenda of a fun day at the office, I decided that perhaps mortgage banking would be the thing to do. I originally was hired by Margaret and Company.
Oh, sure. Mm-hmm. Well.
I started in January 1986, and my very first job in the mortgage business was actually answering the telephone and then eventually processing mortgage loans. And I actually attribute a lot of my success today to that first year in the business.
And what year was that?
1986.
Mm-hmm. And you think it was important having that processing background?
Absolutely. Going back, I think more so than today, but going back, it taught me not what to ask for, but why I was asking. And that is something I think that perhaps some folks that are not as successful in the business fail to understand or recognize. And even to this day, the why you are looking for something can be as important as the what it is that you're looking for.
How about give me an example of that for the listeners?
Well, I think that if you are, most loan officers know that you need a 1 or 2 months bank statement depending upon the product and what you're doing with a loan application. And I think that, the reason obviously is to first to see if they have the money, but to understand how to analyze that bank statement, look for large deposits, look for NSF checks, look for irregularities in that statement becomes an extremely important facet of what you do, so you can ask and answer a question very quickly at an application, as opposed to letting it be opened into processing and then having a processor on the phone, having a customer say, well, Carl didn't ask that question, or the loan officer didn't ask that question. And I think that's really important.
Good point. Or God forbid an underwriter gets their hands on it, down the line.
Right, or a processor misses it altogether.
Exactly.
There's a $4,000 deposit, 3 weeks ago. Where did this money come from? Oh, that's a gift from my grandmother. Oh, then you're going backwards, trying to fix the issue.
Sure.
So I think that those types of backgrounds and those types of things really, I also believe very strongly that you're as good as your processor, and assisting a processor and just understanding their psyche and where they come from and how they feel about certain things is extremely important. And I know how I felt about loan officers and what they did or didn't do, and I think that those things become very, very important to the overall picture of a loan and how it's developed. So needless to say, through mega mergers and changes and backs and forths, I wound up at Chase. I've never actually changed jobs. We got merged into Chase via Sandy Wiles, Primerica Chemical, and then eventually Chase. So I've been with the same company all for my 15 years.
So you've been 15 years in the business.
Right.
When you started off, are there some, not so much to revisit the old days, but there has to be some things that you did in those days that prepared you to be able to do $7 million a month. And so it begs my next question is, what are the things that you did when you started off that you think have value for our listeners out there?
I think that one of the things that I did was I tried to make myself as available as possible while still having certain temperance to family requirements. I think that going out and shaking a lot of hands, going out and talking to a lot of people, knowing and understanding your client base I think, too, the little bit of the difference back then was that there was a much heavier reliance upon a realtor referral base 15 years ago than perhaps what we see today. 15 years ago, if you didn't have a referral base out of your real estate community, then you were not going to be successful. I think today it's a little bit different, and that the loan officers today have a little bit of an ability to market a little more directly and, via internet and a lot of other type of access, as opposed to 15 years ago. That realtor controlled every aspect of that transaction, from the attorney they were going to use, to the title company, to the loan officer, to everything. And I think that was important. Keeping my name in front of people was extremely important. Something as simple as jotting out a very fast thank you note with every single file that came into the door with a business card in it was, believe it or not, uncommonly successful. They always had a supply of my business cards to hand out, and that's something that I think in this electronic world we sort of miss. Is very simple thank you for your business, we appreciate it.
Along those lines, and I don't want to wreck your stream of thought here, but along those lines, and confirming that, I was just re-listening to, which I do now and then, listen to some of the tapes, and I was listening to an interview with Rod Flowers, who's VP and producer. It does about the same volume, 7 million, and as you do, and for SunTrust down Salisbury, Maryland, and he was expounding on his use of the fax machine and how he has taken such a low-tech vehicle and really kind of turned it into something that's better than high-tech. And his theory being that you send that fax out, it's going to sit on a desk, people are going to see it, people have something that they can hold in their hands and review it. And so I think what you're saying as far as writing thank you notes that sound very low-tech and not important for listeners out there, and especially for the new loan officers or people who are trying to get to the next level, that, in quotes, try and keep it all in their head. They make a serious mistake in not doing some of these things.
Absolutely. There's no question about it. You should never have a fax cover sheet that says SunTrust or Chase Manhattan from to Mary Smith, 3 pages, fax cover sheets that go out with your loan approval, either on a banner or, up the side margin should say, another loan approval from Chase Manhattan Mortgage. So it's going to sit on Mary Smith's desk, and they go, oh, you got another approval from Chase.
Right, exactly.
3 other agents walk by and take a notice at that, and it sounds very minute and very gimmicky, but the minute and culmination adds up to something.
Right, and you're right. It's the value added. It's the culmination of using all these techniques, not that one that takes you to a different level. And I think sometimes if loan officers would what I would call deconstruct their careers and exactly what they do. I'm sure there's a lot of loan officers listening to this as we speak that are kind of shaking their head saying, yeah, you're right, I do send a cover sheet out there all the time, not even giving it a thought.
Right, absolutely, and it's something so simple. It'll take you, a half hour, 40 minutes to get it designed, with something, on your computer with drawing. But it's a very simple, little, quick technique.
How about some other things you did when you started off that have applicability in today's environment?
I think the things that we had that applicability in today's environment is again, we are so accustomed to the email, we're so accustomed to the voicemail, and it becomes an excuse of, I don't have time to get out of the office, I'm stuck here processing files. No, you're really not. You must flip-flop your priorities, and you must go out there and you must talk to people, and you must be around to simply shake people's hand them a business card, and you must just stop by real estate offices, and you don't have to bring food every time, and no, you don't have to have anything to say. But one of the things that I have found successful is, and one of the things that is fortunate for me, or unfortunate in some cases, is I happen to live in the community in which I do the vast majority of my business, and that is a blessing and a curse all in one breath. But over the years, attributing to my successes is that I have gotten to know many of the people that I do business with, and I may see, Mary and at the grocery store. Hi, Mary, how are you? We may not even talk about business. How's Charlie? Who's her son? How's Jim's business? Her husband. Blah blah blah. Good. It's great to see you. Maybe we'll see you at the lake this weekend. And I don't even talk about business. It becomes more of a familiarity with that realtor in terms of knowing them, understanding them, doing your very, very best to understand where they come from, what their interests are, knowing they have a lake house up at Lake Carroll, or knowing that, they're an avid golfer, and just briefly mentioning, hey, how are you? How was your last game? Have you been out much lately? And not even talking about business. I would probably say 30 to 40% of my business development is not talking about business. It's talking about personal relationships, understanding those personal relationships. I frequently will get a telephone call. I got a call last night. One of my real estate agents called and said, Carl, you're not going to make a dime on this, but I know I can rely on you for an answer to this question. And it was something about a VA loan and how to structure it. Mm-hmm. And that's the call that I want the most, because that means she feels really good about picking up the phone to call me to ask what she thinks is a very complex question, which took me about 35 seconds to answer. But she will always remember me going forward as somebody who A, she was able to pick up the phone and call at 9:30 at night, and B, that she was able to get a quick, easy answer to what what her thought process was a complex question, which was really pretty simple, but at least to me it was pretty simple.
Right, exactly.
So I think that developing that rapport and developing rapport over and above the idea that they have business to run. And there's going to be lots of times when I'll run into people and they will say to me, God, Carl, I haven't had a thing for you in the last couple of months. I've listed 3 or 4 things, but I haven't had a buyer say, don't worry about it. We're going to catch the next one. If you need a realtor open lunch at one of those listings, call me. We'll catch up on the next one, and then all of a sudden you get the next 3 deals in 45 days or whatever. So eventually, patience and perseverance and for me, what I have always considered an important facet is just being a source of knowledge for referral base, mm-hmm. and being there to answer your phone as much as possible and talk to people about what they have going on, whether or not you're working on it. It doesn't matter whether you're working on it. It doesn't matter whether you're going to make any money on that immediate situation. And I think that those types of developments on a personal level are extraordinarily important.
Yeah, to kind of tie that in, probably on 4 or 5 of the interviews I've done, we've discussed the fact that all sales can kind of be boiled down to 2 things: know your product and know how to close. Mm-hmm. And yesterday I did an interview that had kind of a corollary to that. It was a very interesting interview that I did. The fellow was very articulate. His name's David Waldman, and with Charter One, and we were talking, and he had 3 precepts that he kind of guided his life, and one of them was don't lie. And I think that kind of ties in nicely with what you're saying of having that knowledge base. Have that knowledge base, but if you don't know an answer, make sure that you tell them and then get the proper answer too.
Absolutely. One of the first things I learned in the business, and probably from the time I actually started going all the way back to, my very first days with Mark Retton, was never be ashamed to say, I don't know, I'll call you back. Because that is not an answer, but it also allows you to admit that you're human, and they would much rather have you look in a book, make a telephone call, go to your resource to find an answer than to give them an incorrect answer and have to go back and correct it. And I have found, my standard joke is, we're dealing with the FHA. This is government regulation. I've got 6 3-inch binders on my desk that regulate our loans. I'm going to have to look it up and call you back. And then they always laugh, and I call them back in 10, 15 minutes with the appropriate response. Today, those responses are much more committed to memory than they were in the early years, but, with changes and all sorts of things going on, we just have to be honest with people. And there's been times when I've missed, and that is not a failure. You've learned something, so that's okay too. Sometimes they say, oh, well, I called somebody else and got the answer, and you hang up the phone and you say, gee, that was really sort of rude. They asked me to do this, I did the research, and then they got the answer from somebody else before I got back to them. But I still had the answer buried, and I'll never forget the answer because I'm sort of miffed with this person who didn't have the courtesy to wait for me 10 minutes or 15 minutes.
I do find that, it's funny, we normally don't get into it, but, there is that aspect in the realtor community sometimes where they take loan officers for granted, and we could probably spend a 2-hour interview on that, but, that's just kind of a subtle example where someone, you were going to get back with an answer, and their impatience really turned to kind of rudeness.
Right.
Without giving you the opportunity, whether it was 15 minutes or whatever, they called somebody else on the list, impetuously. But that tells you something about them too.
Absolutely.
They're not going to wait around on a quote for you.
Right.
They're going to be out there searching.
Some of the other things that I have done and I have been successful in doing is to be community involved to the best of my ability without making myself crazy insane from a time standpoint. And I think that some loan officers have a tendency to say, oh, I work too hard, I do this, I do that. I've been extraordinarily successful. I feel very committed to giving back to my community and various and sorted sundry sponsorships. I will very, very, very seldom turn down anybody for a sponsorship. All they need to do is ask, making sure, Chase's name and my name is out there. The community in which I live has a children's fund. I'm a major sponsor on a golf outing. I'm a major sponsor on a run for the Morning Rotary Club. I'm a major sponsor on 2 or 3 other things here that I will do throughout the calendar year to be part of the community and to be out there and to let people know that I'm out there and I'm doing things in the community. My wife and I own a historically significant home that we have rehabilitated, and the Historical Society approached me to be a part of a house walk, and we did that. And we had about 1,200 people walk through our house in one weekend, and it was interesting to note that probably for a year afterward, people would either meet me for the first time or I would see them again on a repeat basis, and they would say, "Oh, I saw your house on the house walk," or "I was in your house on the house walk." And it was interesting to note that the folks that were inside the house giving the guided tours, my wife and I did not do that. We ran away from the place for the weekend. But anyway, I had one of my realtors who was involved with the Historical Society, which is sort of how I got hooked into that whole thing, say to me, she said, "I quit counting at about 110 people that mentioned you as having done business with you or been aware of you in the community via your job, say, oh my God, this is Carl Melby's house. I didn't realize that," when they saw the portrait of my wife and I in the foyer. So it's important that you understand how important community ties are. And I'm not saying that every loan officer needs to live and work in the community. There's lots of days I could just scream with the idea. I mean, I certainly don't go to the grocery store in cut-off jeans, a bad T-shirt, and a baseball hat, because I will run into somebody that I know. And therein lies the downside to living and working in the same community. However, I do think that you can become involved in the community in which you do business, support the community activities in which you do business, business and almost become a part of that community. And I think that that's important, and I think it's maybe a facet that some folks forget.
I think it absolutely is. It's funny because I'm going down memory lane now. We have while we live in an older home that is and in a historic section of Cambridge, Maryland, we have a rather historic collection of Art Deco, and we once did that when I was an active loan officer. Had people through from the Art Deco Society and had a big thing because some of the pieces I have are significant. And you're right; it was amazing the amount of business that I picked up from that. But just as importantly, I think you've articulated, use it, perhaps overuse it, but quite well, the fact that community involvement, it's one of those things sometimes that you can't quite put your finger on the pulse as far as, how many leads am I going to get, how many people are going to call me, but the kind of involvement that you're talking about is extensive and over a long period of time, and one would have to think that over the years that it's brought you significant business.
Absolutely.
And I'm not really directing the comment to you as much as to the listeners out there, hoping to get the hint.
Right.
That community involvement does pay off. It may pay off over the long haul. You may not, it's like Coca-Cola ads. You can't put your finger on and say that brought in a certain amount of business. But in toto, as they add all that up, there's no question it brings in business.
And I think the other important facet of that is that in my particular case, where I have lived and worked in the community for so many years, I genuinely feel, and maybe this is the '60s kid in me coming out, that this community has given me a tremendous opportunity to have a very satisfying career as well as be financially successful, and I owe back. I owe that little bit back to them to help those that may not be in the same position, mm-hmm. and that's important as well to me.
Yeah, you get a personal satisfaction out of it. I'd like to keep talking along the same lines, because this is the first interview where we've really gotten into this kind of issue in such depth. And I guess my next question to you is, for those listeners out there that would like to do something like this and become more involved, any ideas or hints that you could throw out to them?
There's just a mire of different community activity groups, whether it be the United Way or the Rotary Club or the Kiwanis Club or the Women's Junior League. As a matter of fact, it brings to mind a rather humorous incident that I got involved with. I certainly would not be along those same leagues. One of my realtors decided that I should be help sponsor a fashion show for the Junior League, and I said, sure, no problem. Thinking, well, this will be easy. I'll buy an ad in a book, or I'll write out a check, and the next thing you know, I'm signed up to be a model. And
okay,
those people that may know me know that in and of itself is extraordinarily humorous. The only thing I have going for me is my height, but I kind of got roped into this deal, and when I told my wife, she just all but burst out laughing. But we had a great time with it. We had a lot of fun with it, and that was a very highly visible situation. There was about 2,500 women in a ballroom at a local hotel one Saturday for lunch, and
tell me more.
At how many people I ran into later, and so I guess the response is, don't look only to the obvious, because sometimes things that are not so obvious will crop up and be a part of what you're a part of. And I think that finding something that is of interest to you is extremely important. I live in a historically significant home. History has always kind of been an interesting part of what I do, and my involvement with the Elmhurst Historical Society became part of what we do. So I think you have to enjoy the organization that you're supporting. And that's extremely important. The community in which I live has a children's assistance fund for children that are extremely ill whose parents can't necessarily make all their medical bills for one reason or another. It's an extremely important situation, to help assist with, and that's one of the things we're going to be sponsoring, a major sponsor on their golf outing this year. Those types of things are important to me, helping folks that aren't necessarily always less, or that do not have as much as we do. And so I think that, having a compassion for those folks and having a feeling for what you enjoy doing, sometimes it may just be the people on the board with you or things of that nature. Sometimes some community things just need to be done. Sitting on boards for our local school district to assist with a referendum is something that is extremely important. And I think that one of the items that happens is that you wind up being in a situation where you can work really hard on a board and do really good things on a board, but it may not be your number one choice of fun things to do. So yeah. It just comes out to what you feel comfortable with, and I think that
I think there's another
successful.
Yeah, there's another point too. I think for our listeners out there that's been left unsaid, and that is talk about ease of entry. It's easier to get entry into the Rotary and go up and sign off, or go up to the American Legion and sign up, than it is to get into some realtor offices.
Absolutely, there's absolutely no question about that, and I think that. Whether you're coaching kids' soccer leagues, or whether you are, volunteering via the Rotary, or whether you are out playing, golf outings and shaking a lot of hands, all those dynamics become, extremely important, and it may just be where your source of business comes from.
You know what this kind of ties into today, into that concept that you were talking about just a little bit earlier. You alluded to the fact that there's a lot more business being done direct today, whether it's over the internet or, but whatever it is, bypassing realtors, and a lot of companies are trying to bypass realtors desperately in the process. Here's a great example of the ability to go do that. And if you could, crank 20 to 25% of your business through a vehicle like this, that's a significant amount of business.
Absolutely. And what the dynamic that happens is that you meet somebody at a board meeting for the Historical Society, and you say, well, they mentioned that, they're going to start looking, and they start asking you questions, say, well, come on in, let's have a conversation. They walk in their real estate or their realtor's office with a pre-approval letter all signed up with a credit approval, and then all of a sudden the realtor is pushed into using you,
sure,
whether they like it or not. And, then all of a sudden you have opened a window of opportunity where you can, do a good job for them, make absolutely sure that everything runs smoothly, and then sometimes that will open doors for you.
Right, and capturing that realtor, a realtor
exactly.
that normally you would have never called you in a million years.
Absolutely.
No, I think I think a lot of this makes a lot of sense out there. It's going to resonate with the listeners out there. Too often we talk about realtors and how do you get around a realtor and how do you get around a secretary, and the fact you have all these affiliated relationships now between mortgage companies and realtors, without remembering that there certainly are a lot of other ways to get business beyond realtors.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, no question about it.
Now, let me ask you something. Do you, which will bring us to the realtor business? Mm-hmm. Do you do some business with realtors? Do you work with builders? How's your business spread out, excluding the referral base that you've independently built up over the years? I'm not particularly interested in that.
Right. Absolutely. The particular area that I live in, there is no building. So I live in an extremely dense built area. The only builder business is very custom building that is going on with regard to people buying houses and knocking them down. So insofar as builders with subdivisions and 612 homes to sell in them, no, that opportunity is not available to me. My business has been developed very strongly with certain groups of realtors in my community, and as well as some of the surrounding communities as well. And I think that, you know, my main source of business is, of course, still my referral base, and then secondly, you know, my realtors that I do a lot of business with, and then, you know, lastly, you know, there are some very high-end custom builders. It's interesting also to note that territorially, when I started in the business, you used to get a zip code, and, you know, you had a zip code and that was it. Because of changes in the business and so on and so forth, realtors moving around. For instance, I had one particular realtor who moved out of the suburban area into the city center, and had some changes in where she was living, and does all condominium lending, you know, downtown on the lake shore. And I had not that deep a grasp of condominium lending because in the suburbs we just don't have them. So I had to sort of reinvent, because she said, I really want to continue to work with you. You're great, but you got to learn condos. Okay, you know, if you know, we'll learn this together. And because she had never sold them before, so we sort of went off on this truck together. So I have developed realtors that have then eventually moved around and changed their focus. I guess the key is never, again, to say, you know, I'm not really sure about this. We're going to, you know, we can learn together, and if you'll be patient, you know, we'll get this squared away.
I want to ask you, in terms of realtors, with regard to our listeners out there, what changes have you seen in the realtor community in the last, let's just say, 5 or 6 years, and what are your recommendations for people that would like to target the realtor community out there, or increase their business with the realtor community?
I think there's been a lot of changes in regard to the real estate agent does not have the same control. The buyer is much more educated thanks to the internet, and I think that the realtor is excuse me, does not nearly have the same amount of capability to direct a certain lender in as many cases. And I think that pardon me, one of the items that I have, you know, that's the major change. There was a time when the realtor was, you know, the know-all, answer-all person
no
for
question.
the transaction, and that has changed. You know, the buyer's coming in and saying, no, you know, I don't want to do that, or no, I don't want that included in my contract, or, you know, we absolutely must have a radon detection test, you know, on my inspection, and sort of educating the realtor as to what it is that their desires and wants are. And I think that's very, very important. And I'm sorry, you asked me a second part.
Well, no, the second part was really just an extension as far as your advice of people who either new, would like to crack into the realtor community, or those that would kind of like to take it to another level, which I'm a little more interested in.
The number one thing is don't ignore new people. Interestingly enough, you know, you read a lot about, you know, target the top 10%. They're going to produce the most business. And I have my very heavy hitters, and, you know, we do a lot of business together. We understand one another, and, you know, the biggest hitter that I have always says to me, I only deal with successful people. So, you know, that's one of the things that is important to me, is dealing with the successful. And every January she'll say, where'd you come in last year? You know, where's your ranking? What'd you do?
Wow.
And so that's important to her.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
But you also get the feeling she got a little guillotine in her back pocket.
Well, you know, maybe too. You know, if I slid down the list at 25,
right.
I don't know if she would be so great.
Exactly. Be persona non grata.
Right, and even if I do slip down to the list at 25 nationally, I'm always going to be number 1 or 2 in Chicago. So
yeah,
that
right.
always sounds good too. We used to call it lying with statistics in college. But anyway, I have found that developing brand new people is important. One of the things that I always talk to my broker owner about is, you know, when you have new people coming in to learn the business, you know, let me have 2 or 3 hours with them to talk about financing. Let me go out there and let me talk to the new people that know nothing. And invariably I get these telephone calls and they say, you know, don't know what the heck I'm doing here, Carl, but can you help me? And sure, no problem. What do you got? And that, I think, is very, very important. And too many times the new people are left to the side, but the new people become tomorrow's number one people.
Right, and in a way, it's to me, it's an extension of going out in the community in a very kind of greedy sort of way in terms of looking out for your family. It is a numbers game. Maybe out of those 10 realtors, 5 are going to bounce out of the business, 2 aren't going to do too well, but maybe you're going to get 3 that do well, and the same thing in the community. You're out there among hundreds, and in cases, some cases like you, thousands of people, and doing a good job, you're gonna do an incredible amount of business. I have a friend of mine it's a very tangential story, a very close friend of mine. We've been friends since first grade, best friends, and is a very interesting fella. He was a chopper pilot in Vietnam and had 7 choppers. He was a Huey gunship pilot, had 7 choppers shot down under him in the year he was there, and it lived to tell the tale. In fact, had 3 in one day, which is quite a story in itself. But it has 2 kids, and I won't name them because of what I'm going to say, but he has 2 kids that have cystic fibrosis, and it got on the boards and raised literally millions of dollars for CF. And just the insurance and just the amount of business, and of course that's not why he did this, but just the amount of business that he got through contacts and lawyers that he met and people really gave him an independent life.
Absolutely, and that's very, very, very true. There's some tenets I live by, and that's one of the things that I have always learned in the business is, don't ignore new people. Never turn down a loan. When you get a request for a $35,000 condominium loan, it is not too small. Many, many, many times I've had realtors call me and say, I know you don't do this kind of business, but this is a personal friend of mine. Could you help? Oh, well, what do you got? And I said, well, it's only a $120,000 purchase. It's a tiny little condo, and they've got 50 or 60% down. And I said, well, I do that kind of business.
You're right.
Do that kind of business.
I'll do it.
Absolutely. I said, please understand. We may run into some pricing premiums. We may, have situations to deal with. But I am more than delighted to help people out. And a real fast story on that is that I got one of those calls. This is going back about 3-4 years. And sure, I would be more than delighted to help you out. It's never a problem. Lady going through a divorce, traumatized, and I said to her, we're going to get you through this. I don't want you to worry. You've got the best realtor at hand. You've hired professionals. Let us assist you in completing your transaction. Always reclosing the sale. You bought in a great community. You've done, the right thing. You've got the best real estate professional working on your side, and making sure you double close and make sure that deal is buttoned up tight is always extremely important. But anyway, getting back to the original story, was that we closed the transaction successfully. She was very happy. She wrote a note and said, gee, thanks very much. This was really great, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate you assisting me through this tough time. It was not a year later when the telephone rang again. Said, hi, this is, again, my colloquialism, Mary. And I said, oh, hi, how are you? Everything okay? How's, what's going on? Blah, blah, blah. She says, I need a mortgage. And I said, are you buying a bigger place? And she said, yes, as a matter of fact, I am. She said, I need a $500,000 mortgage. And so
there's a nice jump.
who this is, I'm thinking, okay, she's either inherited a ton of money or something's gone on. She said, I met the most wonderful man, and he's the executive vice president of XYZ Corporation. We're getting married. And I told him that I couldn't go anyplace else for a mortgage but to you. And I said, well, I'm extremely flattered. I'm delighted to help you out. And they came in and talked, and he said, he said to me, I wasn't even allowed to shop the rate. Mary said that I absolutely had to do you because you were so kind to her the last time.
So you banged him for 11% for it.
Right.
For me, all right.
Pay for that.
A success story.
No, but the bottom line to the story is that you never know who you're dealing with is going to turn into tomorrow's, bigger client. and it's always amazing, how those things happen. A couple other things that I have learned through the year is that one of my realtors was going on and on and on about a customer who had changed realtors, and she had lost the deal, and I was standing there and I was shaking my head, and then she asked me a question. She said, "What did they buy?" And I gave her my blank stare, and I didn't respond. And she goes, I forgot. You're just like the priest in the confessional. You know everything, you repeat nothing. And I said, that's pretty true. And so the moral to the story is that I hear a lot, I know a lot, I understand a lot. I don't repeat anything to anybody. I don't even tell my wife, because the truth of the matter is that if you repeat stories and talk and then go on about transactions, it will get you in trouble somewhere down the line. And that has always stood me in very, very, very good stead. This is a person's largest financial responsibility that they are discussing with you. And even from realtor to realtor, the information divulged can be helpful or harmful. And I think that one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that it is none of anybody else's business what they're talking about, and that has always led me in very, very good stead. And you always hear about other loan officers that you're in competition with, and somebody saying, well, I heard that they were talking about thus and so. And it's A, it's not an appropriate thing, but B, you can monkey up deals very quickly because you don't know all the circumstances around what's going on.
And that gets into ethics and integrity, and I'm sure anybody out there, listeners that read the papers today, know that there is an assault, and Congress and even the MBA and NAMB is involved in questioning some of the ethics of loan officers who kind of work on the edge and charge excessive fees and points, and and they're prepared to do something about it. They're talking about licensing, and it all kind of leads back into what you say. It's an area that's not covered too much. I'm making plans on doing a couple on it. I know somebody runs the ethics department at Georgetown, and I'm going to talk to him for our listeners. And I do think that ethics count in our business. We don't have enough time to get into it a lot, other than I thought that that's a very valuable point on people keeping their mouths shut. Everybody kind of likes to talk. I know somebody who did a loan once for not just a famous person, but an infamous person. I am dying to tell you the name of this. It would provoke chuckles throughout the listener readership here. And it was a young woman who became very famous very fast, and for something she did. And just someone that was, talking a little bit about too much, having done a loan application, and which I thought was just totally out of hand. Actually, could have got them in trouble, legally.
Yes, it's extremely important to me. It is extremely important to me. The funniest story, real fast, about that was I was at a family function. One of my wife's cousins, not my cousin, my wife's cousins walked up to me and said, "Hey, Carl, thanks a lot for helping us out with the refinance. Worked out great. It was really super." And my wife turned to me and said, "I didn't know you were working with my cousin." And I said, "That's right. And you never would know until he told you," and, which sort of pointed up, the I don't repeat it, including at home. So it is important, and the truth be known, as I get older, most of the time I forget anyway before I get out of the loan application.
Yeah, but I do think the point is well made for our listeners out there, that what they take in they ought to keep in, and hopefully loan officers get a good grounding in some aspect in their life, not to what is called talk behind backs, whether you do it on a personal level and certainly not on a professional level. I was a little bit lucky because when I was in the service, I had a top secret crypto when I was young, and of course the lesson there, of course, is need to know basis, and anybody out there who's been in the military absolutely knows what need to know basis means, and really it's an extension of that you carry forward into your professional life.
Absolutely.
We all like to talk about our successes, and but sometimes you take it and start talking about personal cases, and that's something that you really should not do. Just one other short area I want to talk to you about, and then we'll wrap it up. And that is, there is another area besides the realtor business and referral business you've built up, and community relationships, and that is working kind of outside the box with alternative sources of business. I'll throw a couple out and ask what you do. CPAs, attorneys, settlement attorneys, any kind of areas that you've kind of worked over the years that you found productive, and how, more importantly, how you did it.
Right. I think that one of the things that happens is that you wind up being in a circle of people that you do business with because they continually pop up on your business. Settlement attorneys, insurance agents, believe it or not.
Now, let's talk about it. No one's ever talked about that before. I'm going to let's target right into it.
And one of the things that I have found is that you become how do I say this? You work extra hard to make sure those settlement agents don't have to work hard when they have a settlement with you, and you do that extra mile. Once in a while, if it's a really tough transaction, you get to that closing if you at all possibly can. In the $40-50 million category, that's tougher and tougher and tougher, but you pick and choose closings to go to, and you assist at certain times. Attorneys are not omnipotent. You're there to help and assist them, make sure that that transaction closes. I have a tremendous referral base from one particular attorney who always says, your deals are easy and you make sure that we're taken care of, so I want to make sure that as many of my clients get to you as is possible. Another thing that I have found is over the years prior to the time that Chase sold insurance, I had developed a very friendly rapport in town with my own insurance agent as well as the major State Farm agent in town, and we have referred customers back and forth through the years. And one of the interesting things that I have found is that we complement each other, and I think that that's important. A few kind words. They say, oh, I am going to State Farm, in your particular community to this agent. You go, I know that particular agent, and they do a really nice job. They have us listed on the Rolodex with the proper information with regard to lost payee clauses. But here's something else that they need, loan number, loan amount, so on. Just have Don call me, and I'll make sure that we take care of everything for you. That gives me another opportunity to talk to Don, and Don to talk to me, and as a result, that rapport and that relationship continues to build.
Yeah, I think also, too, just to interject a small point, these insurance agents out there, that's all they do is talk to people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And when refinance time comes around, they're talking to their people, and there's a lot of real positive things that go on there.
Yeah, there's nothing like a reference in terms of a sale. When someone recommends you, whether you recommend somebody and say, geez, that restaurant is just, the food is outstanding and their prices are wonderful, kind of makes you want to get up and go try that restaurant. And the reverse works too. When you have an insurance agent that says, you're going to need this, this, and this for your refinance, if that's what you're thinking about. This is a guy I've worked with for years. You ought to give him a call first.
Right.
He's really good.
Right. Absolutely.
Well, look, I think I'm going to kind of end this on that point. I told you I try and pick a natural high point that everybody gets some benefit from. I do think that this is the first interview that I've done, and that we've covered community service so much, and it's one of those areas that it kind of gets left out. One of the reasons is I think there's a lot of loan officers out there, if the truth be told, that do work very hard. They're very busy. They have family lives and everything. and kind of as an extension of that, they kind of missed the boat in serving the community, because there's a dual purpose here. There's a selfish purpose that should only come in directly, and that's the increase in business to you. The other one, though, is pride in serving and helping your community and rounding yourself out as a better human being. We're all on the journey, and at the end of the journey, you want to be able to look back and said that you served your God and country and family, and I think that's an integral part for it. And I want to thank you for taking the time to point that out to us.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
Well, it was wonderful talking to you today, Carl, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Okay.